Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Private Wireless Network Summit presented by Fierce Wireless. Great to see so many of you joining us this morning. My name is Alejandro Pinheiro. I'll be your host today, and we're here, of course, for the opening session, State of Play for Private Networks, where we are and where we are going. Now, of course, as always, before we get started, a special thank you to our partners for this session, Keysight, Intel, EDX, Aniritsu, and Cisco. Right, just before we get started with the speakers, a quick run through the agenda so you know what to expect over this very busy few days and hour and 45 minutes for this session. In just a few seconds, and these times are all in Eastern, we'll be hearing from Verizon Business' very own Massimo Pacelli, who's joined by Editor-in-Chief Linda Hardesty. Following their conversation, we'll hear from Robert Bosch, very own Andreas Müller, who joins us live to talk about the enterprise view. Following his keynote, we'll get a partner talk with Keysight's very own Jagadish Tantuluri, followed by our live panel hosted by Monica Paolini with speakers from Verizon Business, Bosch, Intel, and EDX. After the panel, we'll close out with our friend Bob Everson from Cisco with the final keynote of the session. Now, a lot to look forward to, of course. Great to see, as I said, many of you here. You can always join the conversation through the chat function just on the left-hand side of the screen. And if you want to send questions to our speakers today and our panelists, you can do so using the Q&A tab just on the left-hand side as well. All right, that's enough from me. I hope that gives you a good oversight of the platform and what you can expect. So let's jump right into the content. And we get started with Linda Hardesty and Verizon Business, Massimo Pacelli in conversation. Linda, over to you.
Hi, Massimo.
Hey, good morning, Linda.
Thank you so much for being here for our Private Wireless Summit. We really appreciate it. So you are Senior Vice President of Global Enterprise for Verizon Business. And I guess my first question is, does your responsibility include the U.S. as well as the rest of the world?
Yes, my responsibilities span across the top 10,000 enterprise accounts in the U.S. And the entire global business of Verizon Business Group, so including EMEA and Asia-Pac.
Okay. So in the U.S., private wireless has gotten a big boost from the auction of CBRS spectrum. And I wondered, has Verizon Business seen a lot more requests for private wireless in the U.S. In the past 2 years?
Well, we have certainly seen an uptick in the request for private networks. We have now a triple-digit funnel of opportunities, and our funnel has increased by a factor of 3x in the last 12 months. Part of it is related to the CBRS availability, but a lot is also driven by the COVID-related digital transformation that pushes enterprise to really consider more and more private network as an opportunity to deliver reliable private networks.
I wondered how Verizon satisfies its requests for private wireless. I have the impression that it's on a customer-by-customer basis.
Yes, it is actually. There's not a one-size-fits-all when you talk about private wireless networks. It really depends on the customer requirements. It really depends on the use cases. Some use cases may require lower latency or higher speeds. And so we need to adjust the design and the configuration of a network to really feed and fulfill the specific needs of a customer. Obviously, I would say when we talk about similar use cases, there's probably 80% of the configuration is very similar, but there's always a 10-20% customization that is required to fine-tune the performance of the applications.
So is Verizon using a big ecosystem of vendors to satisfy its private wireless requests? I know that we recently wrote a story that you're using Celona. I'm not sure how exclusive that is.
Yeah, we use several vendors. We have partnerships with Ericsson, we have partnerships with Nokia, and as you said, we added the Celona to our portfolio. Different vendors fulfill different needs. So we always, again, start from the use cases, what we need to deliver, for the customer, and then we pick the best technology for a specific use case.
So do you think Verizon at some point will create a private wireless in a box, a turnkey kind of offering?
Well, we actually have a turnkey private wireless in a box solution today. We actually do everything from the initial capturing of the needs to the survey, to the configuration, deployment, and day two support. What we don't have is a one-size-fits-all solution. Just because, as I said before, there is always a need of a 10-20% customization. But I would say in 80% of the cases, we have a turnkey solution that needs just to be adjusted to the specific case.
Oh, interesting. What types of companies, first let's start with the US, are asking for private wireless? It sounds like you said you have triple-digit pipeline here.
Yeah.
Are there particular industries that are really interested?
Well, I'd say that interest across all the industries, but there are probably three industries that are particularly hot. One is manufacturing, the second is financial services, and the third is industrial hubs like ports or venues. For example, if I can go a little bit deeper in these three, so in manufacturing, for example, we deliver 5G in the Corning's manufacturing facility of Hickory in North Carolina. And they use this network to deliver multiple use cases, from quality control to predictive maintenance to real-time security and real-time control of the automated guide vehicles. Think of a technology will help you to detect real-time the production of defective products, or helps you to identify right immediately when something is not going ideal in the production chain of a factory. It saves a lot of money and it adds a lot of efficiency into the entire production supply chain.
So I'm wondering, is Verizon getting business from utility companies? Because I have the feeling that they're really big into using CBRS and creating private wireless networks.
Well, it's starting, Linda. We have, right now a couple of larger opportunities with electricity utility companies in the U.S. They see certainly the opportunity to use a private network to modernize the grid and capture multiple data through a private network. So the opportunity is there. It's just starting right now.
Okay. All right. And then because you're responsible for this technology around the world, I wanted to ask about that a little bit. I saw that you recently traveled to Asia.
Yeah.
So is Verizon Business helping companies in Asia to set up private wireless networks?
Yeah, so we are helping customers in EMEA and in Asia as well. So if you allow me, I start with Europe. It's not by chance that the first real implementation of a private 5G network happened in the UK. We provided a private 5G solution for the port of Southampton, which is part of the Associated British Ports. And the initial use case was really to provide reliable connectivity. And we've been able to reduce by 90% the hardware required to provide connectivity in the ports. And plus, we managed to eliminate some dark spots in the area. But the interesting thing that was a basic use case, but it opened up to new use cases, like the ability to track in real-time goods as they get to the port and leave the port, or really to have a real-time detection of security threats. So the interesting thing is that one, you have the infrastructure and you have a high-speed, reliable network. You come up with new use cases that were not initially in the roadmap, but developed almost by themselves along the way. So back to Asia. I was actually in Asia last week, and I had a number of meetings with both enterprises, but also regulators. So I have to say that to their own admission, the market is a little behind in Asia. But we have seen and detected an incredible interest in private 5G networks. I have to say that we have follow-up meetings with every single account where we touch private 5G. And the regulators in multiple countries in Asia have opened up really to talk to Verizon and get input because they really wanted to unleash the potential of the enterprise in the private 5G space. So again, the market's a little behind, but they're really enthusiastic about the opportunity, and I think they will catch up in a very short time.
I think an analyst group just put out a report yesterday that's saying it's really booming in China, but I don't know if there's too much connection with China these days.
We don't have connections in China, but again, it's probably the first country because of the high density of manufacturing company where this is exploding. But it's going to go fast across the rest of Asia. I tell you, if we have this conversation in 12 months from now, the situation will be much different than what it is today.
And what's the difference, or what's the situation with spectrum in Asian countries? Are they going to have something similar to CBRS? Does the government help them out to have the spectrum for this?
Yeah, they're looking into that right now. There are a number of auditions from the regulators. For whatever reason, the regulators even shared with us last week that they've been surprised that there's not been such a big push on 5G for enterprise. They really pivoted to the consumer first. And they were also almost disappointed that there is not such an advanced conversation with enterprises. But they are really open and willing to open up from unlicensed spectrum that enterprise can get by themselves to deliver their own solutions in their own areas. So it's not available yet, but the regulators will really unleash the potential of that market very soon.
I had spoken with Nikki Palmer from Verizon a month or two ago. And she was telling me that aside from CBRS spectrum, Verizon is using millimeter wave spectrum for private wireless. Anything to say about when one is more appropriate than the other, or is it just whatever's available?
Yeah, as you said, in the US, we have the opportunity to use unlicensed spectrum or CBRS or licensed spectrum. We like to start from really the use case, what the customer needs is. In some cases, the customer needs a really high speed and low latency, and that's when we play with millimeter waves. But when not necessary, we go with lower spectrum because it requires less density. So I would say we always start a conversation from what the customer like to achieve, and then we decide the technology and the spectrum that we use to deliver that solution. Really agnostic.
Do companies want their private wireless networks to be connected to Verizon's macro mobile network?
Yeah, it's a possibility. Normally, when customers decide to go through a private network, it's really because they want to have a high level of security within the network. They really want to control the access. They really want to control the performance. So what we've seen in most of the cases is that there is certainly a gateway to the rest of the world, but it's normally happening through a wireline connectivity, which connect that private 5G implementation to the rest of the network, and not necessarily opening up to the macro wireless network. It's certainly possible, and obviously in the US we have that possibility, but we have not seen that as a frequent request from the customers.
Okay. And I guess for my last question, I always like to ask, is there a question that I didn't ask? Is there something really interesting about private wireless at Verizon from your perspective that we didn't talk about?
Yeah, one just interesting element, just to build on what I just said, we see the private 5G as an element of what we call the network as a service. Verizon has this pitch of network as a service, which is a secure, reliable platform that we use to deliver data and application for the customers. Private wireless networks fit into the NAS story. Think of an island where a lot of things are happening in the edge of a network, but you still need this island to be connected with the rest of the world, with customers, with suppliers, with the rest of the business processes of the same company. So that island is connected to the rest of the world with network as a service. So with the rest of the infrastructure, again, normally through a wireline connectivity, but that allows the data and the applications to flow across the entire ecosystem of suppliers, customers, and other business processes within the same organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know that you're big on network as a service, so private wireless is a part of all of that.
It is. It certainly is. It's a super smart, isolated island that has to be connected with the rest of the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Massimo. Really great to have you here at our Private Wireless Summit this week. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, and of course, Massimo, for joining us this morning and getting us started here at the Private Wireless Networks Summit. Well, we're going to move right along, and our next speaker, Andreas Müller from Robert Bosch, joins us live. Andreas, let's see what you've got for us now.
All right, yeah, thank you very much, Alejandro. Great to be part of this. Thanks for having me. Bosch has been an early proponent of private networks, and we still are, and therefore it's really great to see the development that we have seen over the past couple of years. But there's still also a lot of things coming up in future. So therefore, it's a great pleasure to give a brief update from the Bosch point of view on the state of the union of private 5G networks. Well, before checking where we currently are, I would like to briefly recap why there is actually such an interest in private 5G, especially from the so-called vertical industries. 5G, of course, brings a lot of potential to all these verticals, be it manufacturing, be it agriculture, be it healthcare, and so on. And if you look at many of these domains, what we need is really only local connectivity. So factories are local. Building, agriculture is something that you need on a field, maybe on a farm, healthcare, you need it in a hospital. So it's really local applications, but with very special needs and special requirements. That's why, for example, Wi-Fi in many cases may not be good enough. And there are quite a number of concerns that the users have, like a factory owner and so on. So security is a major concern. You would like to keep full control in many cases of your data. Of course, you would like to avoid a vendor lock-in, that you're not fully dependent on a single source, a single provider. And we have the special requirements, and we want to make sure that we can optimize the network infrastructure in a way that optimally fits to requirements that we have. Also, as a vertical player, you would like to be able to act whenever you want. So if I want to use 5G in a factory, I just want to get started myself without having to rely on the public network around me. Maybe there the 5G rollout comes a bit later because the factory is not in an urban area, but more on a rural side. And also a key concern is, okay, what happens if something goes wrong? Who takes care of liability? How can I determine whose fault it was, and so on? And all these things simply get much easier and better if we can build up a private 5G network locally for all the applications that you can see on the left and even more. And that's why it's also such an important topic for Bosch, because Bosch is active in many different verticals. And therefore, we consider this as a key building block for our digital transformation in these domains. So if we check the status quo, and I just would like to touch on different aspects here, it actually looks not so bad. So many relevant features have already been specified and standardized. Of course, this holds for 5G in general, but also for private networks in particular, if you look at the status and PGP. And also there are there's a wide variety of diverse operating models available. So, and I think that's also always important to remember. So private networks is not necessarily, okay, the vertical industries build up the networks on their own, they operate it on their own and so on. But there's a wide variety of different options with different levels of collaboration between a vertical player and a service provider, be it a system integrator, a network operator, you name it. And this variety, I think, is very good and important because For the vertical users, it gives you a choice. And at the same time, there's not a single best solution that is the best solution for all problems and scenarios, but you can really pick then the operating model that fits your needs and is in line with your strategy. So from that perspective, it looks quite good. Also, if you look at the regulatory situation around the world, we see that private spectrum licenses, as we have them in Germany, UK, with CBRS, also in the United States. So this becomes more or less the new normal. So it's not there everywhere, but it's really spreading out. And I will touch on this again on the next slide. And it's not that we necessarily need private spectrum for private networks, but I'm pretty sure without the regulatory changes that we have seen in markets like Germany, like the UK, which were among the front runners, we would not be where we are right now with the success story of private networks. So also, if we look at the offers that are available, so there are more and more dedicated offers for enterprises. Originally, it was maybe more taking whatever equipment is available from the public networks. Also, the MNOs had their processes optimized for the classical business model. And now this is changing. We heard it from Massimo. Verizon, for example, is now having dedicated offers for enterprises. Other operators are doing the same. But it's not just the operators, it's also the infrastructure vendors and also many new players that come up with dedicated solutions, especially targeting at this very attractive market. There's a lot of innovation going on. There's really a huge momentum behind private networks, and we will still much more to come. A very high speed of innovation. There are many startups popping up, offering dedicated solutions. And I think that's also a very, very nice and inspiring environment because, yeah, this simply accelerates our digital transformation again from the Bosch perspective. Now, if you look at the status of adoption, it's a mixed view, I would say. So there are some areas which are already very much advanced. And if I would have to name two, it would be mining and ports. And at least the ports is also something that Massimo mentioned in this the conversation before. An explanation for that is very simple, because for mining and ports, what really matters is especially coverage, number one, and maybe number two is also reliability. And this is something you can get already with a private 4G network, but also with a private 5G network based on release 15. In other areas, manufacturing is really one of the most interesting ones. Also from the Bosch perspective, we have done a lot of work in manufacturing. But here it's a bit more challenging because it's not just coverage and not just reliability, it's also this real-time capability, low latency, and so on. And here we still have to wait a bit until we have release 16 and later release 17 available in infrastructure components and also the chipsets and devices. But all in all, I think we are in a good way, but we are not quite there yet. So still many things will still happen in the near future. Now, I briefly mentioned already the regulatory situation and that local spectrum becomes more or less the new normal. So that shows a little bit my view on the regulatory situation around the globe. It's really very hard to track the situation in all the countries. So therefore, don't take any guarantee that the colors here are always right. And if there is a country colored in gray, that doesn't mean that there are no discussions ongoing and so on. It may also simply know that we haven't really looked into that particular country in more detail. But we see that, especially in Europe, it's spreading out. So Germany, UK, we're among the front runners. In Scandinavia now, we have local spectrum available. In Southern Europe, it's being heavily discussed. In the United States, we have CBRS. Brazil made some spectrum available, Australia as well. And also in Southeast Asia, including India, there are many discussions ongoing. So hopefully soon we will also have an adjusted regulatory framework there. I just checked the status in Germany a little bit in more detail, because that's where I'm from. So it's the easiest country to get more information. So the German regulator regularly publishes some facts about the so-called campus licenses, as they're called in Germany. And as of today, there are more than 200 campus licenses have been granted in the 3.7 to 3.8 gigahertz band. If you look at the millimeter wave range, so 26 gigahertz is just 12, so not that many, but also that is quite plausible because we are also still lacking equipment and so on, especially for 26 gigahertz. And in 3.7 to 3.8, more than 200 is not too bad, but still many of those licenses are used for POCs and for testbeds. But again, this is also because here we are still at the beginning, and especially a device ecosystem, for example, is still missing in many cases. Now, as Bosch, we are not just talking about things. We also have extensively tested already private 5G networks, especially in different manufacturing facilities around the world. So today we still have around 15 active POCs worldwide. One of them is shown here, and that's not really new. I've already presented this in other occasions, but this is our Industry 4.0 Lighthouse Factory in Stuttgart, where we have deployed a private 5G network covering an area of around 10,000 square meters. And we use that not just for gaining experience with the technology, we also want to really understand and learn what it means to operate such a network. And we also want to use it as a testbed for developing our own industrial automation products and components, like the automated guided vehicle that you can see on the upper right. And this is not just an automated guided vehicle that connects using 5G. We are now in the process of offloading then intelligence, control intelligence from the HEV to a local edge cloud, and then closing the control loop over the air. And this is then when it really gets interesting with private 5G manufacturing. And another example here is our semiconductor factory in Reutlingen, also not so far away from Stuttgart. Semiconductor is of course very different from many other kinds of production, and it's also one of the things we want to do, that we really look into different types of manufacturing, understand the challenges, the pros and cons of using 5G there, and come then up with also good guidelines for our plants around the world. So how to use it in the best way, and also what the value add eventually may be. Especially here in Reutlingen, we also did then some EMC measurements, so to check if there are any implications of the 5G system on the very sensitive production processes. But we also implemented a number of use cases, including, for example, industrial LAN and TSN over 5G. So here, a very short summary of the lessons learned from our point of view so far. So first of all, if you look at the spectrum application procedure, for example, in Germany, where we have most experience with, then I can really say it's a very enterprise-friendly process. It's very easy to apply for a local spectrum, and also has been quickly processed. So within 4 to 6 weeks, you have your license and you just pay an administrative fee. And that's good. It's like this because our core business is not providing networks. Our core business is, for example, producing things and developing things. And therefore, it's good that there's a charge, a protective charge for the spectrum, but it should not be too expensive, because then this would prevent us from using 5G in general. Now, if you look at the network performance, so it's still below our expectations, but that's primarily because we are still using release 15 and it's only getting interesting with release 16 and release 17. Network operation is, of course, more complex than operating a Wi-Fi network, but also here, we expect that there might be optimized solutions coming up, and we see already developments in this direction, making it more enterprise friendly and maybe also simplifying the operation, because we don't need a full flexibility that is required for a public network if we take the special constraints and deployment situation into account. The cost is still too expensive, I have to say. So, but here increased competition may help, and also the device ecosystem, I mentioned this already, so it's still in its infancy. And we need more devices to really also be able then to extract value out of this. So all in all, I have to say it's still hard sometimes to come up with a solid business case. So therefore, we are still in the POC phase with our deployments at this point in time. But I'm really very confident that this will change in the next 1 to 2 years, I would say, because we have this high pace of innovation and a strong momentum behind private 5G, and also this new players offering dedicated solutions. Now, before coming to the conclusion, I'm afraid I'm already running out of time. I would like to spend just some words on a big new development in this area, and this is the combination of private 5G with Open RAN. Open RAN traditionally, of course, comes from the public networks. The major operators have driven this, and there's also a lot of potential to be unlocked here. But the real potential from my perspective comes if you combine Open RAN with private networks. And there's basically 3 different benefits. Of course, we have the disaggregation of the RAN, which allows us, ideally at least, to combine different vendors for different components, the distributed unit, the centralized unit, or also the radio unit. so that we have this easy mix and match. This way we can also then tailor the equipment according to our needs. So we'll select an RU vendor, which is suitable for us, or a CU vendor, which has a specific implementation of the protocol stack. And the richer ecosystem in general is helpful to also bring the prices and costs down. But it's not the main advantage that I would say. So on the other hand, the virtualization and softwareization helps, because this way we can easily tailor the network to our needs. And manufacturing is very diverse. Vertical industries in general are very diverse. It means a one-size-fits-all solution is in general maybe a bad idea. Also, fast innovation. It's much easier, of course, to come up with new features in software. Also, the cost might be lower if we run this on general purpose hardware. It may also help us to come up with a convergent compute platform, so that we have a single local edge cloud maybe that we can use for both the network, the Open RAN processing, but also the actual application intelligence. And the third, and maybe one of the most interesting benefits of Open RAN, is the RIC, the RAN Intelligent Controller, so that we have this new building block basically that allows us again to easily tailor the network according to our needs, to also have these XApps and RApps that can be used for specific features and functionalities that maybe only been required for certain niche applications, but still may be very important. It may help us to facilitate a higher level of network automation, and this way bring also then the operational complexity down. And also it may allow us to easily couple the network management and the radio resource management with the actual vertical applications like the production management system. So very interesting topic. In the interest of time, I'll skip the next slide, which just would be an example. And just would like to spend the last couple of seconds here on the last slide. So what's really coming up next? And I mentioned this already, so certainly there's massive growth ahead. So there's a huge potential in private networks. There's still some challenges to be overcome, like the device ecosystem, like the availability of also the features that make a difference to the verticals. But in many cases, time will solve the problem, hopefully. And it's then really a very significant business that is behind this. Then Open RAN, so that's something that's really worth looking into in more detail. I always say private 5G and Open RAN is a match made in heaven. And we should also ensure that the vertical industries get more involved in the corresponding developments. For example, in O-RAN Alliance, which is still dominated a lot by the ICT industry, the network operators and infrastructure vendors, but maybe it would be good to include more verticals like Bosch here as well. And of course, at the horizon, it's still a bit away, but we also see it coming up already, 6G, the next big thing. And 6G maybe, or is very interesting for vertical industries in general, but it may also be very important for the further development of private networks, because it can come along and will come along with completely new features that provide additional value to vertical industries, like integration of sensing capabilities, and so on. So if you have this in a private network in a factory, for example, there are many things you can do with it. Also, if there is native support for AI, maybe AI as a service, this may completely change the way we develop and run our applications and use cases today. So therefore, we are already looking a little bit at 6G, but of course, that's still the future. First of all, we have to make sure that private 5G becomes a real success story. But I'm, as I mentioned many times already now, very confident that this will happen very soon. At Bosch, we are also picking up this development, and that's the last announcement I want to make here. So we are currently planning a major Open RAN testbed for a private network, 5G network that we want to set up at our research campus in Renningen. So you can here see a picture of it. It's a large site, basically. There are roughly 1,600 employees working there. We want to use this then as a basis for exploring and unlocking the full potential of Open RAN in combination with private 5G, but at the same time as a basis for developing, again, our future products and solutions in all different verticals we're active in. So that's something that will hopefully happen later this year. And yeah, I'm already looking forward then to all the learnings that we will get out of this in future. So I think I need a couple of more minutes than originally planned. Apologies for that. But thanks a lot for joining my presentation. And with that, I give it back to you, Alejandro.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andreas. And of course, we'll look forward to hearing a bit more from you in the live panel in just a few minutes. But before that, of course, we'll hear from Keysight's Jagadish Dantuluri with his partner keynote. Over to you.
Hey, hello everyone. Thank you very much to all of you for taking the time in joining us today for this keynote presentation. Keysight has been working with various industry verticals with respect to the private networks, and today it's a pleasure to update our understanding of the industry of and also various verticals what they are doing. So, with that, let me start with. By listing the various verticals that we are seeing as far as the private networks activity and also the progress. If you see, there are various verticals here, and each one of them has different end use cases and so different requirements, like Massimo mentioned before. And based on those requirements, the network requirements would be different as well. Each one of them, if you just see at a high level, most of them have started with the basic connectivity use cases with basic connectivity coverage, but the advanced use cases such as AI-based manufacturing or the time-sensitive network requirements use cases may come at a later time. But the point here is each one of these verticals are at different stages of their private networks implementation, and there are multiple other factors also may contribute to that, such as local regulations or the industry regulations itself, the global trends, the technology adoption, and sometimes the enterprise's comfort itself. Having said that, I just want to highlight here some of the observations that I have seen based on the current status. Number one, the just because a new technology has come, let's say the 5G has come, doesn't mean the private networks or the industry verticals will start implementing that. The private networks business is completely different compared to the consumer business, and the implementation requires certain business outcomes to be met. These business outcomes may be a large increase in the productivity or maybe a decrease in the cost. And mentioning of the cost, again, all these verticals have an issue in terms of the cost or implementing a new technology. Maybe that because of that, it is possible that X as a service business model will grow, and we have been seeing that with multiple companies such as NTT Data, Celona, and other companies are providing this service as X as a service. And the other important thing is private networks definitely requires a lot of partnerships. For example, if you see the traditional incumbents like operators and the network equipment vendors, they are the incumbents in the traditional networks, but they are not the incumbents in any of these verticals. And the vertical industry specialists have a lot more knowledge in optimizing the business outcomes. So it is possible that all of us who are working in this industry may start making partnerships to provide the solutions. And the other important thing is security would be a key requirement. For example, if a private network is installed as an isolated thing, security it may be more easier. But if it is implemented using hybrid mode, then the security would be a challenge. Up until now, we have been seeing a lot of LTE commercial deployment, particularly in the mining, energy, and utilities. But this year, we have been seeing a lot more POCs with 5G, and 2022 may be the year that it may pivot towards 5G. And if you consider any of this vertical, there are legacy technology systems already installed, and no one is going to leave them behind. And that means a seamless integration with the legacy technology is very important. And of course, these private networks must differentiate with the QoE. That means if the QoE is same or equal to how a Wi-Fi network provides, then there is no need of a cellular private network. Or if the QoE is not equal to the wide Ethernet networks, then there won't be any adoption of the private network. So QoE is very important. And then we are seeing quite a few new players in this industry. For example, Bosch, what we call is an operational technology player. Other industry vendors like Honeywell, all these guys or specialized vendors who know the process automation, process control. They understand the end user workflows better. And so these players will play a key role in providing the infrastructure needed for the private networks. Of course, some specialist vendors like Celona and other vendors are optimizing their solutions for private networks. And last but not the least, the hyperscalers will play a key role in providing value-added services. And we'll be hearing this a lot. Private networks success depends upon the mission critical applications that they are going to enable. Having said that, Andreas has spoken a little bit about the spectrum. Spectrum is the most important thing. The way that I see is there are 4 different ways the spectrum can be attained. One is the least, basically going to your traditional operators like Verizon or any of the local country operators. They have the spectrum leased by the operators. They would come and install an isolated private network, or it may be a hybrid network. The other way to get the private network spectrum is the way US has implemented, which is the CBRS, or maybe leasing the frequencies from Anterix. Again, it depends upon leasing the PAL licenses from the PAL license holders, or maybe if you are the owner of the PAL license, that you can deploy these private networks. And again, this is county by county. The next model I would see is an unlicensed model. If the cost of the private network infrastructure decreases a lot, and if it is comparable to Wi-Fi, probably in 5 to 10 years, we will be seeing many private network installations, and I believe that it would happen. And the last and the most important way of implementing the private network is having dedicated spectrum allocations, like what is happening in Germany and in other Western European countries, where the government would allocate a specific small band for the private enterprises, and they are free to deploy their own private network with the help of other stakeholders. And I would say that this is the most effective and the most impactful way of progressing the digital transformation in all the industry verticals that we have spoken before. And that can be seen on ground as well. Germany has almost 1/4 of all private networks installed today, and they definitely are spearheading in this direction. And having said that, now let me speak briefly about the stakeholders in this industry that we need to understand. Of course, the end user, the factories, they are the primary stakeholder, and they can be very diverse. They can come from the manufacturing, mining, warehouses, you name it. And all these guys are experts in their own domain, right? But they are not specialists in the cellular technology. They have many of these companies, if not all, have large IT departments, and these IT departments are now responsible for the private networks as well. But most of them are not well versed with the cellular technology, so they need help from the other stakeholders, and which might come from the systems integrator. The responsibility of these can be understanding the end user use cases, convert them into the network requirements, and then possibly do the spectrum analysis, help them in choosing the deployment model, maybe help the end users in choosing the vendors, then deploy the network, test the network for the functional performance, interoperability, possibly, and then do the site acceptance and hand over that network to the end users. And then the next most important stakeholder holders is the operators. They hold the frequencies spectrum in many countries, in all the countries, and like Verizon can also go into other countries and deploy the private networks. They are experts in building the networks and running the networks, and so they can be a key contributor in many countries. And then is the information and communication technology players like Nokia, Ericsson, and Keysight, who are the experts in this technology. We enable to build the industrial devices, industrial networks, but we are a little bit far away from the end user workflows. So we need to work together with other ecosystem partners to enable these private networks. Then the operational technology players that we spoke before, who are building AMRs or the robotic devices, integrating the cellular modems into these devices, or the industrial instruments by enabling the wireless cellular technology like the torque or the screwdriver that I have shown there, or the XR and VR devices to enable remote training, etc. All these are happening right now, and they would need some help in enabling the cellular technology. Last but not the least, or maybe the most important, are the hyperscalers. They would increase the touch point with the end users, mostly because if you think of it, the data would mostly rely inside the premises of the enterprises. That means more and more the data centers have to be inside the premises or close to the premises, which requires more touch points from these hyperscalers, and also optimizing the vertical applications for the best performance. And so these hyperscalers would get an opportunity to sell much higher valued services. And we would see how the industry will evolve. But these are the main stakeholders in this industry, and all need to work together to enable this industry. And then coming back to the use cases, this was discussed briefly before by other speakers. What I am seeing is that the connected worker is the primary use case for all the industry verticals. It's about connectivity, coverage, and mainly the reliable connection. And as far as the secondary use case, it all depends upon the vertical. Now, let's say if you take logistics, transport, the physical security and the worker safety might be the second most important application. If you take the manufacturing, asset tracking might be the most important, second important application. And then all other things come, but they are for the advanced use cases, let's say the AR, VR for remote training, or the predictive maintenance, which can happen, but the implementation has to grow. The AGVs in the warehouses are pretty much a common use case today, and the drones for the infrastructure security is also becoming important. Now, coming to the whole life cycle itself, the way that I see is this: the life cycle is very similar to the traditional consumer market, but here the actors would be a little bit different. For example, in the build phase, you can have the industrial OT players or the industrial device vendors, or the network equipment vendors who are optimizing their networks for the private networks, would do the research for the next technology, build their products, test, validate, and certify their products, and then offer those things to the operators or the SIs for the next stage. In the next stage, the SIs or the operators would plan the network or design the network based on the end user use cases, deploy the network, possibly test for functional testing, performance, interoperability, and do the site acceptance for the end users. And then it goes into the run phase. And the run phase, the operators, it can be the end users or the managed solution providers who run the networks, and they got to assure that the quality meets the end user requirements all the time. Hence, it has to be monitored. So all these requirements are quite similar, but also a little bit different, because the challenges in these networks would be a little bit different. For example, if you think of an industrial device like an AMR, this AMR traffic is a little bit bursty. Bursty in the sense small amounts of data, but it sends this status information, where it is, what location it is, very frequently, which is not necessarily the same case for traditional consumer devices. And we have an experience where one of the core network has gone down when just 20 devices, 20 AMR devices have been connected to the network. And the point that I want to make is that the industrial devices traffic would be different. And so the challenges would be a little bit different, even though naming can be similar, which is about design and planning, or functional testing, or the performance, or maybe the security itself. Even in the case of security, if you can think of it, the protocols of the industrial security is a little bit different compared to the traditional security protocols. And coming to what Andreas mentioned about if ORAN becomes prevalent in the private networks, the interoperability so that there is no vendor lock-in might also be an important thing. So all these challenges have to be taken care before deploying the private network and also during running the private network. So coming to Keysight, how is Keysight handling these challenges? So we have broad coverage both in terms of breadth and depth as far as providing solutions in this industry. So we have broadly three different solutions, each meant for one for build, one for plan and deploy, the other one for the run. And this depends, these solutions are specifically made for the stakeholders in each of these phases, be it in the build for the industrial device vendors or the network equipment vendors who are optimizing their networks for the build, and in the plan and deploy for the systems integrators and operators who are deploying and handing over their networks to the end users, and in the run phase to perform a 24/7 network monitoring for SLA assurance, and for diagnostics if the network goes down or network behaves badly, and so forth. With that, let me conclude my presentation, and if there are any questions, I can gladly take.
Thank you, Jagadish. Great points there. We're going to move on now to our live panel. It's going to be hosted by our good friend and frequent contributor, Monica Paolini from Sensafili, and she's joined by panelists from Verizon Business, Bosch, Intel, and EDX. As a reminder, it is a live panel, so join in with the Q&A function just on the left-hand side of your screen. I can actually see quite a few questions coming in already, so keep them coming to get the conversation flowing as well. Monica, over to you.
Alejandro, thanks for the kind introduction. And we're going to have a little bit less time, so we're going to try to go a little bit faster. So today I have an excellent set of panelists here. I have Arvind Singh, the Managing Director of Global 5G and Edge Innovation at Verizon Business. Andreas Müller, the Corporate Sector Research and Advanced Engineering at Bosch, and you already heard from him. Caroline Chen, VP Network and Edge Group at Intel, and Bob Akins, the Director of Marketing at EDX. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask my panelists to introduce themselves quickly, and then we'll go with the questions. Keep asking questions, so we will go to the questions from the audience as well. So Arvind, do you want to get started and tell us what you do?
Yes, thank you, Monica. Hey, greetings, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Arvind Singh. I'm responsible for our global 5G and Edge innovation practice for the business group at Verizon. Basically, my team works with customers and partners to really unlock transformative possibilities across verticals and industries that can be powered by 5G or by private networks. So great to be part of the conversation.
Everything. Excellent. Andreas, we already heard from you, so just quick intro.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Monica. So basically, I have two different roles. Basically, I have two different roles that matter in this respect. So on the one hand, I'm driving the industrial 5G activities within Bosch. And as I've indicated during my presentation, so that's relevant for us. And also private networks, and of course, from an end user perspective, so for our more than 250 owned plants, for example, worldwide, but also from the perspective of an industrial solution provider, so offering components and so on to maybe used in the factory to optimize the operations. And the other role that I have is that I'm also serving as the general chair of 5G ECIA, the 5G Alliance for Connected Industries and Automation, which we have established about 4 years ago in order to bring all relevant stakeholders in the emerging industrial 5G ecosystem together.
Perfect. Caroline.
Hi, I'm Caroline Chen. I'm part of the Intel Network and Edge Group. So I lead our network business incubation division. We've been working on Open RAN, virtualized RAN, cloud RAN for many years. And we are now really looking at how do we enable a lot of this effort, like Open RAN, as well as the Edge Group projects that we have, the software we have in conjunction with our IoT group, expand that into various different verticals through the efforts like private networks. Industrial 4.0 is definitely one of the key focuses. Really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you so much. And Bob, what about you?
Hello, I'm Bob Akins. I'm the Director of Marketing in EDX. Thank you for having me. So EDX, for those who aren't familiar, we partner with operators, consultants, system integrators, and end users alike to ensure that their networks are properly designed and meet performance and budgetary requirements. We do this with our design software and software as a service to properly dimension networks, looking at the entire picture, KPIs, for example. And we're partnering more and more on very large network designs. So we're taking actually network designs and offloading them to the cloud and allowing our partners and the operators to run coverage analysis and KPI analytics for networks that cover the entire nation and such. So that's us, and thank you for having me.
Excellent. So we had some very good introductory presentations that told us where we're at. So we can go and go a little bit deeper on some of the topics. So I would like to ask you, Arvind, to start with Arvind, and feel free to then add your comments, the rest of you guys. Now, how should enterprises think about applications and use cases that require public and private networks? And I guess, can you frame it in the context of, if you need a public network, you clearly need to work with an operator, but if you have a private network, you have the option of either working with an operator or on somebody else, or do it yourself. So maybe you can give us a little bit about the sort of what is your view on that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Look, I think as enterprises are looking at use cases and applications that can be enabled on the backs of private 4G, be it private 5G networks, it's important to really look and see what are the services or applications, the needs that are near term, but also those that you'll need access to longer term. Private networks, one of the key foundations is this open ecosystem now with spectrum, right? As countries, as you heard from Andreas, Massimo, Jagdish, as countries have spectrum policies, it's easier now to create dedicated on-prem private networks. It's important to do that, not just on the actual spectrum itself, but the kind of channel bandwidth that spectrum has, how much megahertz swath is available to you, what applications are put on that today versus those to come in future, right? And this is where, again, Wi-Fi networks has been everything to everyone that's on campus and in the office. The intent with private network is be really precise in terms of purpose-built for business or mission-critical applications. So when it's a localized data-only network, be it using CBRS in the US, the unlicensed spectrum, or some of the other bands out there, you are using data-only communication. Anything voice-related would be VoIP communication. Think of services like where you need mobility. If your users need to leave that private network and need consistent, ubiquitous connectivity fabric, you need the ability to roam off of the private network onto the public macro network, right? And this is where, like for Verizon, we have 2.68 square million miles of coverage across the US on 4G. So you need that safety coverage layer for continuity of operations. The other bit is for VoLTE, voice over LTE type of services today. In future, VoNR, voice over new radio. So other IMS-based services, things that may be in the carrier domain that you're used to using today, those get limited if you're running an isolated on-island private network. Hope that answers the question.
But you can do, yeah, you could do voice in a private network as long as you have the handover, right? So is that right?
You could do VoIP. You could do VoIP communications, right? Over the top voice type of services, right? Unless you have a carrier integration, which today, the way we run it, at least for Verizon, we have private network offerings that range from the low end, lightweight, quick to easy deployment, all the way up to the far end, the more robust, using different channel bandwidth, millimeter wave spectrum you heard Massimo talk about, that uses, channel bandwidth that's 400 to 800 megahertz swath of spectrum. In addition to that, we support different user types. Let's say your AGVs, AMR that needs to be localized data only traffic, those are a user type X, right? User type C, we call it. If you need a private dedicated route into the Verizon macro network, you have a different path that we create. And then if you need open public access to the macro network, that's a third user type. So enterprise only, enterprise plus, Verizon only, and then hybrid, where you're able to go between both private and public networks.
Yeah, I guess that the hybrid networks is the new hot word here. It's like not just private, not just. I mean, you just, and I guess it stresses the fact that you just need multiple networks to address all your needs. And so let me ask a follow-up question on this to Bob. What are the advantages? So Jagadish said spectrum is the most important thing, which that is true. If you don't have spectrum, you're not going anywhere. Now, from an enterprise point of view for the private networks, what is that? I mean, can they just use Wi-Fi? I mean, this is a question that people ask all the time. Clearly, there are some issues, but Wi-Fi is also easier, cheaper. Well, that might be the bit, but so what is the role for the two technologies, and would unlicensed spectrum be sufficient?
Yeah, so I think that, when I think of the many benefits of private networks, I think one of the greatest ones is just the foundational and basic concept of providing coverage in underserved areas or markets, which means, areas or markets where Wi-Fi may not be readily available. So, I think one of the biggest advantages of unlicensed and shared spectrum applications is, frankly, that it just opens up more opportunity for maybe smaller, mid-sized enterprises who may not be able to take advantage of a private network otherwise. Conversely, licensed spectrum, there can definitely be some advantages from a performance perspective, but they also come with regulatory challenges, and the availability of spectrum may be limited, as we're saying here. And the time and cost to overcome those challenges, the licensing cost to gain access to spectrum can be a lot for some of those smaller, maybe mid-sized enterprises. And the unlicensed applications reduce those costs and shorten the time to deployment. So I think it's very beneficial for everybody that there's kind of been a shift in the industry to have the hybrid type of networks, more applications for unlicensed and shared spectrum opportunities, so that more enterprises can get involved. And it also opens up new future use cases, I think. So, I think that the shift is going to serve everybody quite well. And like I say, just open up more opportunity.
Monica, if I could piggyback on that.
Yeah, and let's see, Caroline. Okay,
Yeah, so,
we will get to you later. Okay.
Yeah.
So I agree with what Bob said. So we actually have two cases that is started rolling out. Both of them started doing deployment already. That Wi-Fi, we will need some kind of spectrum on the network, LTE and or 5G to serve it. One is a precision agriculture case that we'll be showing a video actually tomorrow in one of the Intel conferences, where we're rolling out, in conjunction with our partners, for example, a coverage for a farm, a vineyard, specifically in the Napa Valley, that will roll out, autonomous tractors collecting sensors. The data goes to the cloud, analyzing and give it back to the farmers. And the other one is that Utah Inland Port, we were building out private networks. In both cases, because the underserved nature, because of large scale, Wi-Fi needs to be complemented. If they didn't have Wi-Fi before, actually, but even if they do have Wi-Fi, you need that large coverage that provided by the cellular. And in cases we've seen, even for indoors, and there are Wi-Fi, Intel has a lot of Wi-Fi in our factories, but they still would like to have an overlay of a licensed spectrum. We use CBRS in this case, but to really provide the more SLA-based solution. I don't think it's a one or the other. It really is about the use cases. I think Arvin mentioned that really dictate what kind of spectrum you will need to have. Arvin, I don't know if you agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Arvin.
no, yeah, absolutely agree. Two comments quickly on this is one, for operators like Verizon, right? 2 decades of expertise running wireless networks. A lot of that carries over to private networks as well. This is where we've tried to alleviate the burden from the enterprise IT by creating sort of an end-to-end turnkey managed offering, regardless of the flavor of spectrum you choose to use, right? That's one. Two, I think it's important that we don't take a either or approach on Wi-Fi versus private networks, right? It's use case dependent. Both have a role to play. There's a reason why there's an evolution path on Wi-Fi, and there's similarly on private networks, be it private 4G, 5G, and then the different releases to come. But think of it this way: applications that require higher reliability, congestion-free experience in the network, quality of service, much more inherent security in place for your business mission critical applications, those customizations, you have much more control on a private network today. If Wi-Fi was solving that problem already, a private network conversation would be a short one for enterprises, right? That's the opportunity we see, that it's not one or the other. It's a way to complement and take the transformation journey to the next level.
Yeah, and I would say that, it's not just Wi-Fi and 5G or 4G. A lot of enterprises use a lot of other bands as well, or other technologies. So really the question is to just look at connectivity. What is that you need to do, and what's the best way to get there? So now I would like to ask Caroline a question, and she's always one of the most positive persons. So I want to ask you the challenge question. What is that we need to do better? So let's not put it as a challenge, but clearly, if you look at it, a lot of people say, well, why don't we have private 5G everywhere already, since clearly there is a need. And so the question to you is that what is it we could do better in terms of, is it the business cases, the devices, technology? Where is it we should put our efforts?
I think, Monica, sounds like you were sitting on my review with my boss because he wants revenue this year now. Why hasn't been revenue, a large amount of revenue? But you just pointed out a couple of things. I think it's still difficult. We've been having conversations just internally, right, with our Intel IT. What is it going to take to put private network into our newly built factories? We're building a lot of factories, building foundries, and so on. And Arvin, Verizon has been helping us with that conversation. I think it's still difficult. The outcome is, IT is very business outcome driven. Speaking as a telco veteran, I've been in business for a long time. We are still very technology driven. We're still speaking different languages. We have to make this a wraparound package. The whole network as a service, and Massimo talked about, is the right part, right thing to do. I give credit to AWS for starting that conversation. When they offer the private 5G service, it becomes the yardstick that we need to chase after. How do we make this so simple that if I could go to the head of Intel IT and say, in the Ohio factory, you got to build. This is a package you should have. That includes Wi-Fi. That includes the cellular network, as some kind of SLA support agreement, as a service pricing. Ideally, even with devices, and then you build on application that can be bolted on, and lifecycle management, automation, single pane of glass. How can we get to that point? Until we get to that point, I think the conversation has been slow, has been convincing one after another. TCO model, business outcome. I think Jagdish just mentioned that business outcome really drives the conversation. We still talk too much of technology. Ironically, I'll give you an example that I was on a farm radio once and talked to people about agriculture needs 5G and edge compute. They literally told me, please don't talk about 5G to our growers. Please talk about how, whatever you do to improve the yield, the less fertilizers that they had to use. the less water they had to use because of the drought situation in the Midwest of the United States. How can we collectively get to that point? I think, I'm looking at, Arvin and Bob and Andrea to teach that to us. And we need this whole group to really make this a much simpler business proposition. Less of a technology proposition, but more of a business proposition. So maybe I'm not as optimistic as you thought I was, but I am optimistic at the end goal. The path to get there, I think we need to get a much better proposition on the table.
Yeah, and I guess we need to, as you said, we need to think about it differently. And this is where I would like to get to Andreas, because one of the keys, so we need to change from a wireless point of view, we need to change, but also the enterprise and all the verticals need to tell us what is that they want to some extent, right? And it doesn't seem like it. So in the wireless industry, we have more of a unified voice, but is the enterprise able to basically tell us what is that they need too? Because it's a two-way conversation, and maybe you can tell us about the role of organization like 5G ACIA in all this.
Yeah, sure. So basically, I fully agree with what Caroline has just mentioned, right? So from the vertical perspective, enterprise perspective, you don't want to have 5G just for the sake of having 5G. You have business problems and you want to solve these problems. So you want to increase your efficiency, your output, whatever. And that's also one of certainly the key challenges that we still have. I mean, I mentioned in my presentation things like we are still lacking devices, we are still lacking the right features in 5G that really make a difference in many cases. But another major challenge here is that there's not a single killer use case typically, right? So I cannot say I implement 5G with this automated guided vehicle and then it already pays the bill for the equipment and the services that I need to run this. Typically, it's a variety and combination of different use cases and applications, and then it's getting interesting. But that's also a challenge then, because somehow it's not a very smooth migration, but you have to take this big step to change different things in your factory or wherever you're looking at in order to have this paid off at the end. From a Bosch perspective, we now start to think more and more of 5G in terms of a platform, of an infrastructure, right? So it should not be maybe calculated as a use case and say I buy 5G and then these 2 or 3 applications, and then I do the ROI calculation for that. But we really have to think about it as an infrastructure, just as we have Wi-Fi today as an infrastructure or electricity as an infrastructure. And who can tell us what the ROI of a Wi-Fi network is? I checked with our plants and nobody could answer me the question up to the current point in time. And I think it will be similar a little bit with 5G in future. So it's just will be a basic infrastructure. Now, coming back to your actual question, the role of 5G ACIA, of course, is very important. Because if you asked enterprises a couple of years ago, and in many cases even still today, what they need, they are telling you exactly that. We need higher productivity, we have to be able to change our production lines in shorter time and so on. And the ICT industry, on the other hand, they say, hey, we have this cool 5G technology, it can give you very low latency, high reliability, and so on. But somehow we have to build a bridge between the different worlds. We have to come to a common understanding how we may use 5G as a technology in order to solve these business problems here. And that's why we have these initiatives like 5G ACIA for the industrial domain, but also 5G AA for automotive, 5G MEC, the Media Action Group for the media industry, and so on, which serve all the same purpose, basically, bringing stakeholders together, also representing a shortcut for the vertical industries to standardization. I mean, traditionally, not so many vertical industries have been engaged in 3GPP, for example, and because it's not a core business, right? So if you go to 3GPP, there are many discussions that are not of any interest to you as a vertical industry, maybe in some cases also for the ICT industry. But we have to find more efficient ways, and this certainly helps. So we can have targeted discussions in 5G ACIA, other organizations, focusing on the respective vertical domain, and then the established players like Intel, Verizon, and so on can take these outputs and basically bring it to 3GPP and other standardization bodies. But maybe to conclude, 5G ACI is not only serving for supporting standardization, we are also doing many more things. For example, we have recently initiated a testbed framework. So there are currently about 10 5G ACIA testbeds up and running in order to validate the technology, to gain experience in real-world deployments, and also to share the outcomes then with the broader ecosystem. We are working a lot on certification. For example, we are in close contact with the CTIA on collaborating here in order to address relevant requirements. And also it's a lot about education, right? So giving, providing a forum basically to educate, especially the OT industry, about the benefits that 5G may bring to them, and also building the bridge that I mentioned before.
Arvin, I see that you wanted to add something to this.
Yeah, just real quick. I fully agree with Caroline's point of view about the education opportunity around private networks, right? I think that's the single most important thing we need to spend time on. And my encouragement would be to find partners that can do your homework, that can help you with your technology due diligence. It's about spectrum. It's about the whole premise of this is radio access network and packet core co-located on-prem, right? In some cases, edge compute located on-prem. But I have a slightly different point of view from Andreas on a few things around the ecosystem itself, right? I mean, globally, there's over 200 commercial 5G networks out there across 120 countries. So that the private network ecosystem will benefit from that momentum. And we're already engaged today with customers that are using sort of bridge devices. Agree that the device ecosystem has ways to go still, but there's bridge devices in the interim for low-hanging deployments, right? Things like better, reliable, high reliable connectivity. Things around computer vision, using video and using 5G gateway appliances or 4G gateway appliances, even IoT devices that are robust in the 4G ecosystem. So we've seen good bit of adoption. I mean, Massimo touched on this. Every vertical is talking to us about the private network opportunity and what different set of tools they can use for worker safety, for better, even education sector. How do we evolve the learning experience of the future, right? AR, VR, things like that. So I would invite us not to wait, but really do your due diligence now on the technology, on the spectrum, and the device ecosystem that's available today, and understand how that's going to evolve in the future. Because I can almost assure you there's commercial off-the-shelf devices that can work for your immediate needs, at least in some use cases, right? Maybe not 100% of it, but a subset of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob, I saw you wanted to add something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add quickly that I also very much agree with what Caroline was saying. And honestly, I think, the education and the partnerships around this topic is one of the key takeaways, probably because, I think there is this thing that happens with new technology rollouts where a lot of enterprises are wondering, well, what's my new business model? What's the new revenue model? Or how do I achieve a solid ROI if I do switch to this new network? And also, I feel like, with new technology rollouts, we kind of wait for the other shoe to drop. We need to see others kind of implementing these networks with proven ROIs and new use cases and business cases and things of that nature. So, I mean, I would like to see early adapters and the folks that are deploying these networks and using these networks to continue just talking about them and, publish use cases and things like this because, something will resonate with somebody else and then they'll be able to correlate that with their application. I think that, even though there's so many different use cases out there, I think there's an underlying commonality between all of the operators and enterprise and integrators that kind of lends itself to players having a voice and setting standards and ensuring requirements are met. And so I just think, again, the more we talk education, like we're saying here, published use cases, organizations like 5G, ACIA, things like that will be very beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, let me follow up a question with you, Bob, and everybody can then add. We always talk about different use cases and different verticals, but another dimension that is quite important is the size of the business. So, for a large corporation, it's a very different kind of effort, a different kind of thing to have connectivity than it is for a medium-sized or a small business. how do you see in terms of like, the deployments, the complexity of it? How do we deal with different size businesses?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's probably a few different differences between the size of enterprise. So I think it largely becomes a question of, is it a capital intensive upfront expenditure, very hardware driven? I guess basically you can boil it down to CapEx versus OpEx in the size of enterprise and which way they will need to operate. I think the hyperscalers are a player in this sort of question because, as we move to more cloud-based applications, and some of those networks perhaps offering consumption-based pricing models, which move more towards an OpEx instead of the trying to recover a return on your investment on capital-intensive hardware deployment. So I think that's kind of one thing. And then another is kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, the unlicensed shared spectrum applications versus the other ones in which you're trying to overcome regulatory challenges and such. So I think those are kind of probably the main differences I can think of for that.
Yeah. Thanks. So let's move on and talk about, you mentioned, I think, Caroline, you mentioned AWS. So there is clearly a role that hyperscalers are taking. Mobile operators are also really keen, and Arvinius talked about it, and then also system integrators. How do you see the different roles that these entities play, and how do they meet the need of the enterprise to have control over the network? Which is what I hear over and over again. They want to, they want something simple, but they also want to be able to control what's going on in the network.
If I may start, I would just look at what Arvin just mentioned, right? Operator knows how to do this. They've done this for years and translate that from a macro to enterprise. But the role of the cloud cannot be overlooked. We just go back to the example that we were working on in agriculture side. It was the SI that in that particular vertical that knows how to put it together. We have the telco equipment manufacturer providing a LTE and 5G radio on site. But AWS, in this case, actually built out outposts near the farms to be able to get the data and analyze it and run it and give it back to the farms. There were also on-prem edge compute that runs it. It happened to be CBRS, so there was no involvement of the mobile operator per se. But going forward, because CBRS is not everywhere, it's not in many places, especially outside the United States, we have to work very closely with the mobile operators in where the licensed spectrums belong to them. I happen to serve on the board of Telco Infrastructure Project, TIP. We actually start taking up on this and looking at what's the role of the mobile operators and the role of the SIs and different verticals, enterprises. So it really becomes an IT, OT, and telco collaboration in a way that is comprehensive, because that's how enterprise IT knows how to operate, right? I really cannot go to Intel IT and say do this without talking to them about, because we run a lot of things with on the cloud. Microsoft Azure, for example, is one of our providers. If you look at that kind of equation, we really cannot just simply say, cloud doesn't play or mobile operator doesn't play. We have to find a way to make sure that this ecosystem, and since we talk about verticals, many verticals have their own specialized SIs. If you go to DoD, they have their own SIs. How do we make that coalition work together, and the value chain where the money trail also needs to be fair, so everybody gets their fair compensation? That's the only way, I think, to make this ecosystem work. And that might be the thing that we are working through. So the blueprint that we are looking at includes most of these players today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anybody wants to add anything to this?
Monica, if I could jump in here, I truly believe there's a rich ecosystem for everyone to play, right? I mean, we realized early on as Verizon that hence why we forged some of the partnerships with the cloud service providers, right? For public and even for private edge compute capability of having Outpost and some of the offerings on-prem. But the key here is, you know, starting small. When we're talking about large enterprise or different vertical industries, you can't blanket the entire coverage area with a private network. It may be creating what we call innovation sandboxes, right? Deploying a small scale deployment, giving the capability to the enterprise itself to kick the tires on the technology and test it out in real world, because there's so much you can glean from webinars and presentations, but nothing beats hands-on learning and really seeing the power of the technology when you have RAN, packet core, edge compute, all co-located, enabling sort of some of the capabilities that you previously weren't able to reach, right? So this is where a high capacity, high availability, low latency network can do magical things. But SIs are also critical, right? We have tremendous partnerships to deliver the network piece as well. The Nokia, Ericsson, Solona partnership you heard. But SIs really bring above the network competencies and really the end-to-end sophistication that's much needed, right? It's one thing to deliver sort of a turnkey managed network infrastructure or network as a service, but it's another to be able to enable the application sets on top of that. And depending on the industry, the complexity of things are much higher. So depending on the degree of complexity, you may need one or two tier one partners at your disposal helping you on this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been taking questions from the audience and sort of rephrase them, but there is a couple more that I wanted to address and this is for Arvind, and it's about the CBRS spectrum. So in your offering within the US, are you only using or primarily using CBRS spectrum or other spectrum as well for private networks?
So we have both. We have couple offerings, couple different vendor partner offerings with CBRS only. That is where I know the ecosystem has a lot of activity right now. We wanted to make sure we have a low-hanging option that's quickly, easily deployable for organizations to test out. Our license spectrum, which is the premium experience, quite frankly, license spectrum is the most expensive air money can buy. We use a combination of our mid-low band spectrum and also our high band spectrum, our millimeter wave bands, right? This is, again, if you're getting into use cases, warehouses, computer vision, video, one of the big things about public networks as opposed to private networks was public cellular networks were downlink traffic heavy, right? Majority of the capacity was built into the download traffic. The uplink was light because there wasn't much user generated content going upstream. These days, with immense video collaboration, the uplink traffic patterns change. As you get into use cases that are on private network, you need that functionality, that flexibility to do uplink, much higher uplink needs, right? For two-way video, bidirectional video, for computer vision, and whatnot. The other bit is CBRS, depending on where it's being deployed. Remember, one, you have to work through the spectrum access system providers, right? The Googles, the Federated Wireless, and the others to get access to the spectrum. But if you're anywhere close to ports and stuff, or the Navy may need to use that, there's that awareness you need to have that you need to relinquish that spectrum for that moment in time when it's used by the incumbent, right? The DoD agencies. So yes, we do have CBRS, low, mid, high band spectrum offering on licensed band as well. And all of it is managed. So we really come in and create a turnkey offering, give it a single pane of glass view for the enterprise, and help with the integration effort with the existing IT/OT technologies.
We have 1 minute left, so I would like to ask all of you to just say very quickly, what should we see that is going to speed up things over the next year? What is the most important thing that's going to happen? So, Bob, do you want to go first?
Oh man, I think I'm going to go ahead and go back to partnerships, education, organizations, making sure standards are met, requirements are met, KPIs are met, all of those things. So keep having talks like this, partner, move forward, break through the wall, the other shoe drop, all that stuff.
Caroline.
A mature as a service proposal that addresses the business needs of as well as the TCO needs of enterprise.
Perfect. Arvin.
I would say partnerships, technology due diligence, and bi-directional collaboration with the enterprise. You will never get to business outcomes and strong value props until the providers that are enabling you and vision have good insight into what it is that you're chasing, right? Be it near term and then long term as well.
Excellent. Andreas.
I think the most important point is still missing is the device ecosystem, and related to this, the availability of these features that make a difference to many verticals, so the low latency, time-sensitive networking, and so on. And this is hopefully something that we will see then in the next one to 2 years coming up.
Well, thank you all, and we'll see you next year. We'll have an update and see whether we've met all those these challenges.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for in the audience as well.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Monica, and of course to our panelists. What a great discussion. And of course to all those of you attending who sent in questions. We haven't gone through all of those, but I'm sure there'll be opportunities for you to reach out to our speakers and get the conversation moving beyond this event, of course. Right before we close out the session, now we'll hear from Cisco's Bob Everson, who will add his thoughts to this great session thus far. Bob, over to you.
Great, thank you, Alejandro, and thanks everybody. That was a really robust discussion, fantastic to listen to, and I think a lot of good points by everybody. I know, I think I have about 10 or 11 minutes here now for this, but the good thing is that I think when we're framing up the problem, we're thinking about this very similarly, and what you saw from that was a lot of great opportunity. Still some things to solve, and it's still quite complicated. When we look at enterprise adoption, I think that's one of the key things that we have to do to speed this up is to simplify things. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of jump into my slides here and probably move through some of this a little bit faster. But there's a few things that I want to lay out here. And one is I just want to take a step back and think about what's driving this, because we've talked a lot about use cases and all this, which is really important. But if we think about what's bringing this all together, it's really been three waves. And the first wave is around the cloudification of the enterprise IT organization, and that moving to the cloud, enabling greater automation and enabling greater analytics. And then building on top of that, as we move into the operational environment, the OT environment, this whole notion of Industry 4.0, where we get greater connectivity and greater intelligence, which reshapes operations and allows for the full digitalization of operations. And then, lastly, building on top of that, we have to talk about hybrid work, because this has changed more than just the connectivity. I think the obvious thing around hybrid work is I need to be able to connect to the network regardless of whether I'm at home, like I am right now, or I'm in the office, or I'm on the road. But the other side of that, and where this comes in so important for this discussion, is I need access to those same resources. So if I'm in a manufacturing or an operations environment, distribution environment, I need to access all those tools, all that data, all those analytics. And so IoT, the digitalization, and private wireless can help us speed that up. And then as we move forward, looking even into the future, and I think the near future, where we get all of these things and all of these people connected together, we get new capabilities around the spatial web with richer experiences as we move into things, like the metaverse. And when I say metaverse, I don't mean all of us living as avatars in some virtual world 100% of the time. I think that's interesting for in some areas. But what I mean by this is where we really merge virtual reality, augmented reality with what I like to call the ultimate AR, which is actual reality, together to create richer experiences for the people, for the environment, and for the enterprises there, which allows for much greater efficiency. Let's see if we can move forward there. And that's really what it comes down to. So we can talk about wireless and all these different connectivity types, which is important because that's what's enabling it. but to the business users. And I think what you've heard across the board here is it's about those business outcomes. It's about the business results and, productivity, efficiency, being able to make better decisions quicker, increase yield. And so there's all sorts of things that are involved in this, all sorts of opportunities. We're seeing a lot of, really interesting activity in different vertical areas, in different segments. We look at, video cameras and the analytics that you can get off of that, things like connected car, bringing automation to manufacturing, distribution, the whole supply chain, all sorts of real technology opportunities here that increase the productivity and efficiency of businesses. But ultimately, it is about the business results. And it's important that we speak the right vocabulary. I think Caroline mentioned this. I think Andreas and others have mentioned this as well, around the business outcomes and understanding what's really important to those business users. It's not, quite honestly, we talk to them and they say, look, I don't want to learn 3GPP. I don't want to know about my device authenticating and going through a packet core and all of this stuff. I don't even really want to have to worry about the spectrum. What I want to do is I want to know how it's going to improve the analytics in my business and my understanding and my productivity. So, the plant output, uptime, data that I'm getting from sensors to allow me to make faster decisions. And if we keep talking about the wireless connectivity and the wireless link and all these things that are really complicated, we're actually not getting to solving the business problem. So more than ever, I think it's important to be able to obscure that from the business user. But the only way you can do that is by actually solving these problems and simplifying it, which is what I think we're on the path to doing. Now, when I thought about use cases to bring up, I thought, okay, everybody's going to be talking about, warehouse, distribution, manufacturing, all of these, energy, all these that are really big. And I thought, okay, I'm going to hit a unique niche here with farming and agriculture. And then Caroline had to give the give the agriculture example. But kidding aside, the reason why I wanted to bring this one up was for a couple of reasons. One, it is a real use case. Agriculture is an industry that will benefit greatly from automation and greater analytics. But the other thing that's interesting about this, and this is a work that we have ongoing with a university where they're looking at how to drive intelligent farming, is what you see here is that we're using a broad variety of wireless connectivity. So this uses, licensed and unlicensed. It does use, low-powered wireless. It uses Wi-Fi. And it's about bringing all this together because as we're in this transition, as several people said, and I think Andreas made the great point, the UE ecosystem is not completely pervasive right now. So we need the devices, and we need to be able to enable devices across a wide variety of connectivity types. And so that's expressly what we're doing here. It's actually an exciting use case, and it's designed to evolve as the UEs evolve. Now, when we talk about simplicity, what do we really mean? It's easy to talk about simple. We talk about simple, intuitive, trusted. What does that mean? Well, I wanted to start with this, and the way I start with it is with our IoT Control Center platform. This is a product that's based on almost 2 decades of experience right now. We have over 200 million devices. We have 30,000 enterprises attached to it, and tremendous volume. And that provides connectivity to IoT devices that are largely on the public networks. And then what we've done is we've built our private 5G network to provide private connectivity. We've built it around Control Center because many of those devices will be IoT devices that need those same kind of capabilities, but then they need more. And they need the enhancement of our converged core for 5G applied in the private network there. But that doesn't exist in isolation. So that private network, that enterprise already has Wi-Fi networks, they have wired networks, they have all of this infrastructure that's inside their infrastructure, inside their network, as well as connecting to the public cloud, and they manage that in a certain way. And so what they're saying is, if you want to make this simple, don't make me learn some new system to do this. Allow it to integrate into my existing systems. And so what we've done is we've built that in where you can still get the 3GPP authentication of the wireless device, the SIMs, authenticated, but then that automatically gets pushed as an enterprise profile over to the enterprise system. So then the enterprise can easily manage that just like any other resource or person on their network. There's much more beyond this. We're not prepared to talk about all of it publicly yet, but we're providing a holistic approach to unify the identity, policy, and security across the enterprise with the service provider, enabling everybody to be successful here. So it's really exciting. And in the end, really, kind of summarizing on our solution, and I think, again, the great thing is that a lot of these have been brought up before, but we've got to hide the complexity. We have to take the 3GPP, sort of, I don't know if it's right to call it a mess. There's a lot of value to it, but to the enterprise, that's not their core competency. That needs to be hidden. It needs to be delivered as a service, simple to consume, simple to adopt, and simple to operate. And so that's what we've designed around this to allow for them to bring this in as another important connectivity type for them to solve business problems. So then wrapping up, so I think we're about at the top. There's really 4 key takeaways that I wanted to leave you with here. Number one is, we're early. It's still not as pretty as we'd like it to be. There's questions about spectrum. There's questions about UEs. There's questions about, how all this stuff comes together, but we're in the right place. I think one of the challenges with 5G, 5G brings great opportunity. I think more than any other generation, we might have gotten ahead of it on the hype cycle a little bit more than others. And so as a result of that, we've been talking about 5G for so long, and everybody's saying, okay, why isn't it all here and ready for me and everything should just be working? But if you step back and look at it, it's developing at the right pace. It's all coming together. I think over the next 12 months, we're going to see tremendous progress. We see the UEs maturing. We see spectrum being allocated. Operators are doing trials. All of this is coming together. And once it does, I think we'll see it take off quite nicely. It's really important right now to build the right foundation because that foundation matters. Access problems we can solve. If you talk to wireless experts, solving access problems in the enterprise is much easier than what we've done in the macro networks. We're going to solve the access problem. Let's get the foundation right. Let's get it integrated in there where it can support all these different use cases. Make sure it supports 5G and 4G, Wi-Fi and unlicensed and licensed, public and private. The power of the and in the end, simplicity rules, because that's what's going to drive the adoption. It meets the requirements and it's simple. And with that, I thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Bob. And of course, thank you to all of our speakers for what has been quite a session, a lot of content and a lot of information for all of us to digest. So thank you again for all those of you joining us. And of course, thank you to our partners, Keysight, Intel, EDX, Anaritsu, and Cisco for their support for this event. And of course, in this session. Now, the great news is you've probably heard a lot today, but there's more to come. Just after this session, in fact, you'll be directed automatically. We'll be hearing from Salona. So we offer you the opportunity and, of course, hope that you stay with us. All you have to do is sit back and let your browser refresh and take you over to our next session. Until then, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.